Hello, welcome back to RetroBreak and welcome to my review of the Analogue Pocket, a console that I've been excited for about 2 years now. Of course, I know there's been hundreds of videos about this device already, but I promise you I've got some really interesting and unique takes on this that I haven't seen anyone else talk about. Of course, as you can see, I've got a huge Game Boy collection, but I've also got a really big collection of homebrew and unlicensed games, as well as a few weird carts as well. So I tried all of them out on it, and I've got some really interesting stuff to share. But first, a word from my channel sponsor, Bifrost Bridge Studios. They're a transmedia narrative company that have actually just successfully completed a Kickstarter campaign for their upcoming graphic novel, Gaia's Seed. So if you like what you're seeing over the screen right now, definitely go and check out the website after this video. And now with that said, let's take a look at the good and bad of the Analogue Pocket. Here we go. So for anyone watching who somehow doesn't know what the Analogue Pocket is, basically it's a really high-end Game Boy that's made by Analogue, a company that's very famous for their FPGA hardware clone consoles. I've got the Super NT, which I did a video on in the past, and I absolutely love that device. So when I found out that they were making their own version of the Game Boy, which is by far my favourite console of all time, as you can see, I've almost got a complete set of UK Game Boy games. I was so excited to get my hands on this, and I do have a lot of thoughts about it. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is how good the screen is on this device. It's got a 1440p display, which is just insanely high resolution for the original Game Boy. In fact, it's 10 times higher resolution than the original. And what this means is Analogue can actually make some really fantastic screen filters for this, which actually mimic the way the pixels looked on the original system. I'm not going to go into detail about all of the nitty-gritty bits because there's some way better videos on YouTube that could do that, so I'll put a link in the description to some of them, because it is a really interesting way that they went about creating these filters for the systems, and as you can see on the video playing over this right now, they do look absolutely incredible. It's by far the best that I've ever seen these games look, and probably the best screen on a handheld as well. Now for my next good thing about the Analogue Pocket, I love the size of it. It's really comfortable to hold. It's pretty much identical in size to the original Game Boy. The buttons are in more or less the same place. They're a little bit smaller, and as you can see it has 4 instead of 2 on the original. And the fact that it has 4 buttons is actually really good, because you can actually use what would be B and Y, so like a SNES game, if you're playing a SNES platformer, you can hold your thumb on the Y button and press B, which is a lot more comfortable than trying to use A and B like on the original Game Boy. And that was actually something that I wish Nintendo had done for a long time. As you can see on all of their original Game Boys, the way the A and B buttons are aligned is actually in a sort of diagonal up direction like that, whereas I would actually always have preferred to hold it like that, so your thumb's going diagonally from the bottom right to the top left instead of the other way around. It's just a lot more comfortable that way, so I'm really glad that Analogue actually gives you the option to play any Game Boy games using those as A and B instead. And the fact that they're not labelled actually makes it a lot easier and less confusing as well. And the buttons themselves, the face buttons and the D-pad, all feel really good. I've seen a few complaints online with the D-pad saying that when you press down sometimes it moves in a diagonal direction, but I haven't had any problem with that at all. I don't know whether I just lucked out and got a good unit, but I have to say the D-pad actually feels really nice. It's not that clicky, it's kind of spongy. It's kind of, let's see, it kind of feels like a bit like a Game Boy Color D-pad. It's not really clicky like the GBA SP D-pad is. The one downside to the buttons though is the L and R buttons on the back. They're actually really difficult to press down, surprisingly. Like even worse than on the GBA SP, which they're kind of modelled off. They actually take a lot of force to press down. And I was playing F-Zero Maximum Velocity, which is one of my favourite GBA games, and actually pressing down the R button, sometimes it didn't even register. I really had to press it down quite hard, and I actually ended up with sort of a red mark on my finger, so it's not really that suited for playing games that use the L and R buttons. I wish they were maybe buttons on the back that you could press, or just not as difficult to press down. They are quite painful. As for the weight of the console, it is quite on the heavy side. It's actually It's a lot heavier than something like the Game Boy Color or even the original Game Boy. I'd say it's slightly heavier than my phone, which is the 12 Pro Max. So if you've got an iPhone Pro Max, then you kind of know how heavy it is. It is a little bit on the heavy side, and it was a little bit uncomfortable lying in bed and playing it. I felt like it kept almost sliding down in my hands, and I had to sort of cup it at the bottom there to keep it in place. I've got the Switch Lite here, and I would say it is even heavier than the Switch Lite if you're holding them side by side. I do love the form factor though. I love the fact that it's small enough just to slip in your pocket and just forget about it, and that is absolutely fantastic. Coming from bigger consoles like this recently, which obviously don't fit in your pocket, it's actually really good to actually have a handheld that you can actually take with you. Now for the actual build quality, and I do have a few complaints about that. For one thing, the power button on the side isn't actually a switch like on all the other Game Boys, it's actually a flat button, and you actually have to hold it down for quite a while before it turns on and off. It actually takes a lot longer to turn on than any of the other Game Boy systems that I've used in the past. And if you are swapping carts regularly, that is something that I found a little bit annoying. Like with the original Game Boy, you can literally just flip the switch and it comes on instantly. So to have to wait that like 5 to 10 seconds every time you want to play something is a little bit slow, and I really hope they'll be able to speed it up in the future using a firmware update. Another complaint that I've got with the buttons is the volume buttons here. They're actually really small and they're very difficult to press in as well. I had to actually use my nail and sort of press into the actual middle of the buttons to make them do anything. And the way the volume shows up on the screen, it's not like a slider like the original Game Boy. They are just buttons to press up and down, and you can't see how high or low you've actually got the volume, because when you press it, all it has is a little plus and minus icon, which was a bit disappointing. I wish it would have like a slider, kind of like you get on the iPhone when you'll get a sneak peek as to one of the videos there, but like you can see when you press up and down there to change the volume, you actually get to see it rather than just seeing a plus and minus icon. So maybe they could take another cue from Apple there and implement something like that in the future. The speakers on the device are actually amazing. They sound way better than any other Game Boy that I've tried in the past. I also love the ability with GBA games to turn on a high quality option. It makes the output from the system sound a lot better than the original GBA, which always felt a little tinny and hissy, but on here it sounds really clear. Now for the really interesting bit, and this is a bit that I've been really looking forward to telling you guys. This is my tests of the system. So I was playing around with all of the different types of cartridges that I've got to see which ones would work and which ones didn't. So I tried every single homebrew game that I've got here, and the majority of them did work, but there were a few on the right here that unfortunately didn't. And I did try these about 10 times each to try and get them to work, but no matter what I did, they always went back to an error screen. I've been talking to a few people on Twitter about this, and they think it might be to do with where they sourced the PCBs for those particular cartridges, because some of the later revisions of the same games seem to work on the Analogue Pocket. So if you're getting this just for homebrew games, be warned that some of them might not actually work. But the good news is, every single official Game Boy game that I've tried on this does work 100% flawlessly. So most of the homebrew games worked, and there's actually something really cool that Analogue have done with this. They actually let developers who use Game Boy Studio to export their games as a .pocket file, which means that you can actually put them directly onto the micro SD card on the console and actually play them without a cartridge inserted at all, which is fantastic. So if you go on GB Studio and click on Play Creations, you can see I've already got some here and they all run perfectly. And in fact, even some games that aren't GB Studio, some developers have actually been porting their games to the Analogue Pocket already. So this one is Petris, which I mentioned in a previous video, and as you can see, it just looks absolutely incredible on this, and it plays flawlessly even without a cartridge inserted. Of course, I also tried out a load of weird accessories like the Game Boy camera, like games with gyro sensors like WarioWare Twisted, games with rumble support like Drill Dozer here and Perfect Dark, and they all work absolutely fine. Even things like Shantae that I got from Limited Run, or even repros like this one of Lufia 3, they all work absolutely flawlessly as well. There were a few instances of things that didn't quite work properly, and for people who like using EverDrives and flash cards, I have good news. Both of the EverDrives that I used, the EverDrive X5 and the GB EverDrive X7, which I've done videos on both of them in the past, they both work absolutely fine. But I do also have another flash card, which is the Easy Flash Definitive Edition, which I'll actually be doing a review on very soon. But unfortunately, this one doesn't work at all. It just comes up with this screen here, which says Analog Link Mode, which apparently means that it's not compatible at all. But from what I've heard, some of the earlier revisions of the Easy Flash do work. You might have noticed as well, and you might have heard from some other people's reviews, that the cartridges... Well, that just proves my point. I was about to say that the cartridges don't actually slot into anything. They literally just go in like that and they're completely exposed, which is kind of weird. You can see at the bottom there, the pins are actually exposed, and you just put the games gently in the top like that. But I haven't had any problem with it. They work fine. So there's Dangan GB, one of the best homebrew games that I've got. I've got to turn it down a bit. You can see my struggle of turning it down. You can't actually just press it with your finger. You have to get your nail in there and try and click it down, which is a bit awkward. But yeah, it's running. There you go, as you can see. Give it a shake. Still working fine. So I don't really think it's a problem. Let's actually get into the game so you can see it moving and see what we can do to kind of get this to break. So it's playing. I'll shake it around, hit it a bit. I feel bad doing this, but I just want to test it. I even hit the back of the cartridge quite hard there, and it's still running fine. In fact, it's actually come out a little bit at the back, and it's still playing. So I think it's actually... No, it's crashed now. Pushed it back in. I think they are quite sturdy. Like, you don't need to worry about it coming loose. And yeah, let me just turn that off so I don't break anything. As you can see, it is quite a snug fit, and it doesn't really wobble around. With GBA games, obviously, this is one that I tried before. This is a fan translation of Mother 3. As you can see, they actually stick out quite far, but your fingers aren't really going to get in the way, even if you're using the L and R buttons. So I don't really think it's a problem at all, and it is really sturdy in there. The reason I think they did the cartridge slot like that is for things like this, which is the Game Gear converter here, which actually snaps in there and actually stays flush against the system. And of course the Game Gear games are taller, so they stick out a bit, but they run really well on the system. It's the best I've ever seen Game Gear games look. And I've actually got quite a good Game Gear library as well, but I've never really had a good way of playing them. So the fact that this can play Game Gear games flawlessly is actually really good, and I'm really happy with the results. As for battery life, I am a little bit disappointed. I haven't really used it that much. I played it for maybe an hour last night and maybe an hour today, and it's already dropped down to about 60%. It does, however, use USB-C charging, which is great. Hopefully in the future everything will use USB-C. It's just so convenient for everything to have the same port. So I'm really glad that they included that, but the battery does seem to drain quite fast. I don't know whether that's because I'm mostly using EverDrives on here. Do I think it was worth the money? So when I pre-ordered it back in 2019, I think it came to around £200, and honestly, yes, I think it is definitely worth the money. Analogue is a premium manufacturer, and honestly, I was prepared to pay up to about £500 for it. That was around what the NT was when that was first released, so I actually think that it's valued too low, honestly. It is a really premium product, especially if they fixed some of those little gripes that I've got about the system. I could easily see this being worth about $300, and obviously included in that cost for me was the Game Gear adapter as well. And they are making more adapters. I think they were about £30 each, which I think is brilliant, you know, no complaints there really. And unfortunately I didn't manage to order the dock. I think that's about another £100, and that lets you play them on the TV. I managed to order it in the second batch, but that's actually not going to arrive until the end of next year. I've heard at the moment it's quite basic, but hopefully with some future firmware updates it should be a little bit more full featured by the time I get my hands on it. And that's something else as well. A lot of the problems that I've mentioned with this can probably be fixed in firmware updates, and I'm sure Analogue will keep supporting it in the future. Now the next next question is around Game Boy Advance games, and I haven't really mentioned them too much. So I was asked about whether I think they look good compared to playing it on an original GBA, and of course, like I said, this screen is the best that I've ever seen, and even GBA games look absolutely incredible on it. They do have a few different options. If you go into the settings for the system, you have a few different display options there. You have an SP101, which is the new backlit version of the SP. You have original GBA, which kind of mutes the colours a bit and makes it look more like the original GBA console, and then you have Analogue GBA, which is just raw pixels, which also looks really nice. So you have three really great display options. Of course, the main problem with the GBA games is the fact that obviously they're in widescreen, so you do lose a little bit of vertical and horizontal screen real estate, but if you really want to, there is actually the option to stretch the screen to fill the entire height of the display, and then you can adjust the Y position to bring it back up. In fact, it doesn't actually look that bad on V-Rally. I was actually pleasantly surprised how good this actually looks, being stretched vertically. Obviously, it's not the intended way to play, but I actually think I could get used to it, especially for games that try and push the 3D of the GBA, which is always a bit blocky anyway. Looking at the two screens side by side, the actual space that you get on the screen is roughly identical, maybe a tiny little bit smaller on the Analogue Pocket, but you really won't notice a difference. They both look absolutely amazing, whether you've got a SP101 or whether you do have the Analogue Pocket. If you actually hold the Analogue logo and press up and down on the volume button, you can change the brightness there. It does get a lot brighter than the SP can. So bright, in fact, that the camera's struggling to keep focus of it. So yeah, I'd say it's a good way of playing GBA games, as long as you don't need to use the L and R buttons, because like I said, in fact, I don't know whether something's wrong with my R button, because it really doesn't press down properly at all. Like, the L one you can feel clicking, but the R one is just sort of squidgy. Of course, for GBA games, nothing really compares to the horizontal form factor, so I really hope in the future that Analogue will make more of a GBA styled one instead of a Game Boy original styled one, because this is absolutely perfect for playing original Game Boy games on. But for GBA games, I do prefer the comfort of holding it sideways, and that means that your fingers can go all the way across on the back, which is really comfortable. But yeah, for what it is, it plays them perfectly fine, and you don't need an adapter or anything. They just go in the back like regular games. It does look a bit scary, but like I said, they're in there pretty safe and secure, so it's really not an issue. I know some people have been a bit worried about it. That's it for now though. I'm just so happy to have this. I'm actually going to go and play it right now, so I'll see you next week for the next episode. Goodbye.